Abraham had children that were not children of faith. They were children of the flesh. Abraham had Ishmael with Hagar. After his wife Sarah died, Abraham took another wife named Keturah, and he had additional children with Keturah. Ishmael was a child of the flesh. The children with Keturah were children of the flesh. They were not children of the promise. They were not children of faith. Ishmael was not the son of the covenant. Abraham's children with Keturah were not the children of the covenant. Look what it says. In Isaac, Abraham's seed was called. Isaac was the child of faith. Abraham had children who were not part of the covenant promise. And the point that Paul is illustrating here is that Abraham had children that were not part of the promise. So being just a physical child of Abraham doesn't mean that you're also a child of promise or a child of faith. Only Isaac was the child of promise. And so God chose one son of Abraham and not all the sons of Abraham. Just like within the nation of Israel, there is spiritual Israel, but not all of Israel. And with Abraham's children, not all of Abraham's children are children of the promise. Just Isaac was the son of promise. The others were children of the flesh. Not all the natural children of Abraham are the children of promise. And so the unbelief of Israel and the Israelites does not mean that the promises of God have failed. Going back to verse 6. God never intended for all the descendants of Abraham to receive the promises and the blessings, but only the remnant. It's only through Isaac, and not all the sons or all the children. So now he goes on in verse 10. And not only this, but when Rebekah also had conceived by one man, even by our father Isaac. Remember, the covenant passed from Abraham to Isaac, and then it's going to pass to Jacob. Verse 11, for the children not yet being born, nor having done any good or evil, that the purpose of God according to election might stand, that's important, not of works, but of him who calls, it was said to her, the older shall serve the younger, as it is written, Jacob I have loved, but Esau I have hated. God chose for the covenant blessing that he made with Abraham, the covenant that he made with Abraham, to pass from Abraham to Isaac, and then from Isaac to Jacob, not Esau. Esau was the older son. Jacob was the younger, but as it says in verse 12, the older shall serve the younger. So God predetermined for the covenant to pass from Abraham to Isaac and then to pass on to Jacob and not to Esau. And we're told here it was before Jacob and Esau were even born that God made this decision. Just like with you and me, God predestined us to salvation before we were even born. And God chose Jacob instead of Esau before Jacob and Esau were born. And he says, while they were in Rebekah's womb, verse 11, before they could do any good or evil. And that's important. So God's choice of Jacob was not based on Jacob's goodness or his merit. God chose Jacob to continue the covenant promises that he gave to Abraham. And God chose Jacob before Jacob was even born. And verse 11 says, God chose Jacob, look what it says, that the purpose of God according to election might stand. And he chose Jacob before Jacob was born so that his election might stand. And his election does not rely upon works, but upon him who calls. You see that in verse 11. And so God chose Jacob to continue his purpose, to fulfill his covenant. And God's election of Jacob, it was all about continuing and fulfilling his promises that he made to Abraham. And because God chose Jacob before Jacob was born, God's choice of Jacob had nothing to do with Jacob's works or his merit or his performance or his goodness so that the election stands. In other words, Jacob cannot nullify God's promises by his actions or his works or his performance, because it's not based on his actions or his works or his performance. It's based on God calling before he's even born. So works, performance are not even in the equation here. So Jacob cannot now void God's promises by his performance. And in the same way, God chose you and me before the foundation of the world. He preordained us. He predestined us for salvation before you were born, before I was born, before we could do good or evil. And so this selection of us is not based on our performance. Our performance is taken out of the equation. And so we cannot nullify God's promises to us by our performance or by our works or by our actions, because our actions are not part of the equation. They're not part of the selection process that God used. That's what he's driving at here. And so Jacob or Israel cannot do anything to set aside these promises that God has made to them.